I grew up in the village of Hawkhurst. My father had been married before. He'd lost his first wife in 1915 when he was in the army. Unfortunately, she had a tumour on the brain, which left him with a small boy. He met my mother through a break in the pictures. In those days, it was a regular thing that used to happen with those old-fashioned pictures, they'd break. And he apparently was sitting next to my grandma and got in conversation with grandma, and from grandma to mother's side. And grandma apparently invited this soldier back home for some coffee. And I think the rest is history, because they met, I suppose, 1916, 17, I don't know when. They didn't tell you things like that in those days. They married in 1919, and nobody expected me to arrive at all. And I think it was a terrific shock when mother discovered that she was pregnant in 1924. I arrived perfectly formed, but under 4 pounds in weight. So of course you can imagine I was mollycoddled. And then at the age of 5, I had appendicitis and peritonitis. God knows why I got it at that age, but I did. So of course that was another setback. So I was rather, shall we say, closeted as a child. I mean, I was very precious. At any rate, I grew up, went to grammar school, and I'd got ideas of what I wanted to do. And then that nasty little man with the toothbrush moustache upset the whole thing. And so just exactly 2 months short of my 15th birthday, and when I was going to take, in those days, the school certificate, which is the equivalent of O-levels, he goes and starts a war. I was up in my bedroom sorting some bits and pieces together. It was a beautiful, sunny, warm morning, and I got the window open, and the people across the road had got the window open. Now they had something they were very proud of, and that was a very top-range radiogram. You know what?
Yeah.
Radio and gramophone combined. And it was belting forth rather, and I suddenly thought, that voice, it went, "Mum!" I shot down and said, "Put the radio on." So we got the radio on, and we just got the tail end of the speech. And I looked at Mum, she looked at me, and I could see she was trembling a little bit. But I didn't say anything. I thought, best say nothing. At any rate, my father, who had a wonderful singing voice and was in the church choir, had obviously gone for matins. And then, of course, the siren went almost immediately, so the vicar decided to close the service and send everybody home. And Dad came in the door. And at the time, for a long time, I couldn't work out the meaning of the look that passed between my parents. I couldn't quite fathom it, but I thought afterwards they were thinking of those 4 years that they'd gone through and all that it had meant. I mean, Dad lost 4 cousins in the First World War. And my mother's brothers were all gassed. 2 of them went to live in Australia. And, that they had, it was the thought of that, I think, again, that went through their minds. It was that gave that look. It was only a flash, but it was a look, and it stuck in my mind. The grammar school that I was at took a grammar school from London in, because they were evacuating to Kent in those days, not knowing that they were going to take them all on. And it meant we were only doing 3 days. And Father said, that's not good enough when you've got your exams later in the year. 3 days is not enough. He said, I must see where I can get you. And he got me into Benenden. And of course it was very nice. I could cycle to Benenden, which I did, and it was very happy. But of course once Dunkirk came, they packed up completely because they were under their own rules. For the last 6 weeks, I think, before the exam, I studied on my own and went up to Tunbridge on the individual days to take the exams. There was a room of 30, I suppose, girls taking French exams. And we were sitting there, merrily, quietly doing our bit. And we heard an aeroplane. Didn't make notice, plenty of aeroplanes about. And then all of a sudden there was this god-awful noise, bullets on the roof. And of course, as it was what was supposed to be a temporary building for about 30 years, it was a corrugated roof. The noise of those bullets was incredible. Fortunately didn't do any damage to us. I don't know whether it didn't damage outside, but it didn't. None of them penetrated everywhere. But there was all that awful noise. Suddenly, and not one girl squealed, squeaked, or they noticed. I started working in an office in the village, and I was there until I went in the Wrens. I duly volunteered, went to Chatham for my medical, first time I'd ever been in Chatham, and they heard nothing. Then papers suddenly turned up for me to report to Mill Hill on the 4th of November, the day after my 18th birthday. So Mill Hill at that time was the entry place, for all the usual square bashing and explanation of Navy terms. The moment you step out the door, you're going ashore. Galley, heads, I could never understand. And then, of course, all the other things to do with naval life. And also you had a series of lectures and so on and so forth. I found myself with 3 other girls that I'd never seen before, being sent to an RAF station in South Wales. I mean, I think we were only sent there to discover what radar really was. I think it was really a mistake. I think we should have been sent straight to Portsmouth to the radar, HMS Radex, the radar establishment down there for training. Anyway, from there, we eventually got sent to where we should go, and that was down to Cornwall. And I had a wonderful summer there. I imagined the reason we were on the local RAF coastal stations, because they were all the way around the coast, south coast, the RAF stations, was because like 99 places out of 100, the local area was on direct current, DC, and you needed alternate current, AC. And of course, they had an alternator. So it was probably better to stick us on a corner of the RAF site than have someone have to buy an alternator. So that was what happened. At any rate, we were quartered at a little place called Portsgather. At least Portsgather was there, and then you could go down a beach and across and up and along a road for about half a mile, perhaps a little bit more. And then on the seaside of us was this house, this very nice house, which had been built as a summer residence for a businessman in Bristol, commandeered by the Navy, and housed a petty officer, a cook and a steward, and 12 Wren operators. Straight out of it into a garden, out of the garden down a potato field, down the cliffs. A little tiny bay at the bottom, sandy bay with masses of rocks in the sea in front, so that it didn't have to have anything to stop anything landing, because nothing would land. It couldn't. If you went back towards the village, the beach you had to cross there was all barbed wire and what have you. to go on watch, a lorry would come and pick us up, take us past the Raff and Gaff quarters, which was quite a distance away, mile and a half, something like that. They had a beautiful hotel that had been commandeered, which is now, I think, a sort of top hotel in Cornwall. It's still a hotel. And you went along quite some distance through a village called Wrens, which is famed because at either end of the main street it has round houses. Because the legend was that if the devil came down the road, got in that first house, he'd go round and round and then go back the way he came, instead of going into the village. Look, but in a lovely day, it was a fantastic journey, because in the distance, as you approached where the headland where our set was, you could see the cliffs, the kaolin cliffs from the China clay, which shone white. You know, it was like a sort of thing from the Arabian Nights to look at. It was really lovely. But everything went very smoothly. I don't remember any problems. From work point of view, we were under the jurisdiction of the RAF, but I mean, the WAF officer used to come and say hello, how are you, and that's about all she ever did. She wasn't interested, which didn't matter, because we all managed. Fortunately, we all got on very well, all of us, and because three of us still watched each time. And it was a very interesting and pleasant existence. The thing with us was we were on this headland with this little set, and our area, where the RAF area went up like that, ours went straight out. So our beam went straight out to pick up anything that passed on the water. The idea basically was, because I mean, although one doesn't realise it now, I didn't realise it then, because we didn't know what was going to happen, but it was all extra thinking to the point of view of invading France. You know, the D-Day, it was all to do with that, basically. To make sure we didn't get those little nasty little gunboat things that came in. I know, unfortunately, somewhere further up the coast, Devon, they did have a dreadful thing, didn't they, with the Americans. A lot of them were wiped out. And I'm afraid our Navy people didn't come off awfully well out of that, if I remember rightly. So the three of us in October got a nasty shock, because we suddenly found we were being drafted again to the Lizard, of all places, for the winter. Because there's no worse for wet and wind, obviously. It's the most drafty place in Cornwall, southernmost point. And we were actually, to get to the site from where we were quartered, we had to go just out the house and take a cliff path along until the next headland where the set. So the first time I went on duty, I was soaked to the skin. But the thing with the house was, it was a nice house, nicely built, Victorian, I should think, full of nice timber, but no electricity or gas. The Navy supplied 2 Tilly lamps. One, of course, was permanently kitchen or dining area, and the other one in reception, in the sitting room. At any rate, to go upstairs, it was either a candle or a torch. And I thought, I don't like this very much. Right home to Dad. Dad, we used to have those little lamps. I remember the little, sort of about that size bowl with about the equal sized globe on top. Nice little oil lamps. Said, if we got them, can you send me one? One duly arrived, and I became the most popular person in the building. Can I borrow your lamp? I want to go upstairs. Of course, although it was pretty grim, because even on your day off, you couldn't go anywhere because there was no transport anywhere. If there was a bus to Helston, which was the nearest town, it must have gone very early in the morning or something like that, because there was nothing in the day. But, of course, when the weather began to improve, and, of course, spring comes early to Cornwall, and I remember a March day, I was off duty, going out and walking along the cliffs to a very famous water place called Kynance Cove. It's got a little cafe there. It was there even though it was open even in the war. And you could get a cup of coffee or whatever was allowed. And walking across there, the birds, and the early flowers, it was absolutely beautiful. But we were then all called back off all the stations to Portsmouth to be reallocated somewhere or something. Well, by that time, of course, the doodlebugs were about. And I was worried. Somebody wrote to me, and technically they really shouldn't, because they were telling about all the ones that had dropped in and around my own village. And I knew my father had heart problems. My mother was very nervous, and I thought, I don't want to be sent too far away. I think I'll ask if I can have a compassionate posting. So I went to see the CO at the time, and they were very helpful, very nice, and they said, well, the nearest we could do is Portsmouth, but it'll be gunnery radar rather than, what you've been doing. I said, I don't know. So I had to go on a course to Radek's house for that, so I then went to the gunnery school at Eastney, part of HMS Excellence as it was in those days, because you've got to be right on the coast and you've got to be far away because you had live firing as a result. But it was very interesting. It was a very interesting place to spend the rest of my service. I met up with some very interesting girls doing other jobs, and I also worked. I was very proud of the fact I worked with the bloke who'd been allocated a destroyer's rolling platform, twin Bofors, and the use of aeroplanes from the nearby Thorney Island Air Base, as it was then, to experiment with laying and training the guns directly from the radar. Because, of course, as you can imagine, they were experiencing an awful lot of problems, particularly in the Far East. They were losing a lot of ships because you could lay and train a gun in absolutely perfectly on your target, but then if the old girl did that, you were off. It's not like a gun on the flat ground. She's unmovable. I mean, it hadn't worried that much, I suppose, under normal battle conditions, because you were fighting another big lump of metal. But when you're only doing a tiny little thing like that that's coming dead at you, and I mean, they were able to do so much damage, then that's why there was an urgency to get it done, I think. But the Wrens did their part in, one had to do the aerial and one the RT. I used to love doing the aerial because it was in a turret right up on the top of the main building, and you've got this aerial in front of you, and you had to run along the skyline about the level of the lighthouse thing that used to be out there. I believe they've pulled half of it down now, but you pick your aircraft up, it was somewhere around there. The moment you picked it up, you came back in with it right the way till it was over your head. I did actually on one occasion have a twin Oilicon, have a go, but no, it was very interesting, and I was there until such times as I was demobbed. I was offered all sorts of jobs, promotions and things, but I obviously couldn't do that. I'd got to go home. I mean,
Yeah.
D-Day, yes, I was in Portsmouth. I remember only too well. Being there in Portsmouth, I mean, you're well aware of the amount of water there is between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. And as the build-up to D-Day came, that filled till, I believe, one of the Wrens that was interviewed round about the time of D-Day 80 was saying you could walk across the... I think it was a bit of an exaggeration, but it wasn't far short. There was everything you could think of there. And, I mean, obviously there was an atmosphere. You knew something was going to happen, but... And then, on the morning of the 6th, I had to cycle from quarters in Down End in Eastern Parade to Eastney. And I remember as I cycled along, looking at the sea and noticing just this wide grey expanse. Then I looked closely and I could see there was the movement. So I thought, yeah, I won't say what I thought in those wooden, because it must have been hell. Absolute hell. I mean, just the wooden thing in itself wasn't bad, but with that, and the amount of swell that obviously was. So, oh yes, I remember it. My brother was in the 8th Army. He went out North Africa, Sicily and Italy, and up, I think he was on the Austrian border when he finished. And I remember, I mean, like most of them, he never talked about any of it. But I did say to him one day when I was at home, and he must have come home for something, because he was married, of course. I said, Bill, what was the worst experience you had? You know, I was thinking back on, it must have been a thinky day. He said, Sicily landings. That's all he said and nothing more. But I've subsequently learned, because there's been quite a bit about that sort of thing, the going into Sicily was bad. Somebody had given the game away, so they were expected. But he never said any more, and I never asked him anymore.